Muhammad Ali stood motionless in the center of a crowded induction room in Houston, Texas. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glare on the tense faces of soldiers and officials watching him. Dressed in a dark suit, polished shoes, and the unmistakable air of conviction, he had just been called to step forward for military service. But he didn't move, not an inch. His silence echoed louder than any protest. A recruiting officer, clearly agitated, stepped closer and asked sharply, "Do you understand this is a federal offense?" Ali turned his head slowly and replied, calm but defiant, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. None of them ever called me N-word." His voice rang through the room like thunder, his words shocking, unapologetic, and unforgettable. What happened next would change not only his life, but the soul of a nation. In the early 1960s, Cassius Clay wasn't just a boxer. He was a force, a storm in gloves. Young, bold, beautiful, and lightning quick in the ring. He didn't just win fights. He entertained. He provoked. He mesmerized. Reporters followed his every word. Fans hung on every rhyme. And critics, they seethed. But none of it mattered. In 1964, he stunned the world by defeating Sonny Liston to become the heavyweight champion of the world. He danced, he shouted, he declared himself the greatest. And, to many, he was. But just as the spotlight reached its brightest, Cassius Clay did something unthinkable. He changed his name. He stood before the cameras and said with quiet certainty, "Cassius Clay is a slave name. I didn't choose it, and I don't want it. I am Muhammad Ali, a free man, and I belong to no one but God." It was more than a name. It was a declaration of identity, a war cry against centuries of racism, ownership, and silence. And suddenly, the cheers grew quieter. Sponsors walked away. Critics sharpened their knives. The world that once loved his confidence now called him arrogant, unpatriotic, dangerous. But Ali didn't flinch. He aligned himself with the Nation of Islam, a movement feared by much of white America. He stood beside Malcolm X. He refused to bow to the media, to tradition, to anyone. In press conferences, he spoke not just of boxing, but of justice, of equality, of black pride. He was no longer just a fighter in the ring. He was fighting on every front. And America, it was watching. But not everyone was cheering. To some, Muhammad Ali was now a threat. A man who refused to play by the rules. A black man who wouldn't stay silent, wouldn't be grateful, wouldn't conform. And while he trained, spoke, and carried the weight of his new name with pride, a storm was quietly brewing, one that wouldn't come from the ring, but from the government itself. It was April 28, 1967, Houston, Texas. The room was sterile, the kind of space that stripped men of identity and turned them into numbers. Lines of young men stood shoulder to shoulder, each awaiting orders, each called to serve a war they barely understood. In the middle of it all stood Muhammad Ali, 25 years old, at the peak of his physical power, world heavyweight champion. But not here, not today. Here, he was just another name on the list. When the clerk called Cassius Marcellus Clay, the room hushed. Some looked up in surprise, others in disbelief. Everyone knew who he was. But Ali didn't flinch. He stepped forward, calm, still, then silence. He didn't take the next step. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't move. A military officer, his voice clipped and formal, stepped toward him. "Mr. Clay, do you understand that refusing induction is a federal offense?" Ali turned his head slowly, meeting the officer's eyes with unwavering calm. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the tension like a razor. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. None of them ever called me N-word." Gasps, shuffling feet, a few suppressed murmurs. The sentence landed like a bomb. In one instant, Ali had rejected the might of the United States government, not just with words, but with principle. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He stood there, in full view of the nation, and said no. But it wasn't just defiance. Ali's refusal came from a deeply rooted conviction, one shaped by faith, by experience, and by truth. As a devout Muslim and a member of the Nation of Islam, he believed war, unless for self-defense, was forbidden by God. killing strangers halfway across the world. People who had never harmed him, didn't align with his beliefs. And there was more. Beneath the religious principle was a deeper injustice. How can I kill other poor people abroad? He asked in interviews, while black folks in my own country are being lynched, beaten, and denied basic rights. To Ali, the real enemy wasn't in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The real enemy wore badges, passed laws, and sat on city councils in America. And for speaking that truth, they came for him, hard. Within hours of his refusal, Ali's world began to collapse. The very same sports commissions that once chased his signature now turned their backs. His license to box was suspended, not just in Texas, but in every state. Overnight, the heavyweight champion of the world was banned from the sport that had made him famous. He was stripped of his title, his passport revoked. He was branded a draft dodger, a coward, a traitor, a disgrace. Television hosts mocked him. Newspapers ran headlines that dripped with scorn. Former fans booed his name. Politicians called for prison time. Talk show panels debated whether he deserved American citizenship at all. But Ali didn't hide. He stood on stages, in community centers, on college campuses. He spoke to thousands, not about boxing, but about justice, about peace, about black pride. He turned from athlete to activist, from champion to symbol. And while the media framed him as a fallen hero, something far greater was happening in the streets. Young black men, poor men, and students, they saw something else. They saw a man who wouldn't sell out, who gave up millions rather than betray his beliefs, who didn't just talk, he acted. Ali, the fighter, had become Ali, the conscience. But conscience came with a cost. In June of 1967, the U.S. government delivered its verdict. He was found guilty of draft evasion, 5 years in federal prison, a $10,000 fine, and more than anything, exile from the ring. No fights, no income, no glory. He appealed the decision, but the process would take years. And during those years, Ali, the greatest fighter alive, was barred from doing the one thing he had trained his whole life for. From 25 to 29, the prime years of a fighter's life, Ali was locked out. He had no platform but his voice, no gloves but his truth. And through it all, he remained calm, composed. Even when mocked, spit on, laughed at, he answered with dignity. He never begged for forgiveness. He never backed down. And every time he was asked why he did it, his answer was the same. My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother, he'd say. I'm not going to help kill innocent people. And if it means facing prison or losing my career, then so be it. I'd rather die standing up than live bending over, in an America on fire, torn by war, civil rights protests, and political assassinations. Muhammad Ali had become something rare, a man who wouldn't be moved, a man who said no and meant it. He had once been the most watched man in the world, but now he was alone. The headlines had moved on, the lights faded, the crowds vanished. What remained was a man, stripped of his crown, silenced by the law, and betrayed by the same country that once celebrated him. Muhammad Ali was officially banned from boxing, and not just for a few months. For over 3.5 years, no fights, no paydays, no spotlight, just silence. In the ring, time is the deadliest opponent. It doesn't punch, it erodes. It eats away at reflexes, speed, strength. For a boxer, your prime is short. And Ali's prime? It was being taken from him one day at a time. While his peers continued to fight and cash checks, Ali found himself boxed into a different kind of ring. One made of courtrooms, public scorn, and constant surveillance. Every step he took, someone watched. Every word he spoke, someone wrote it down. Every action was scrutinized. He had been turned into a cautionary tale, a warning from the state, defy us, and we will erase you. But Ali didn't break. He didn't disappear. He traveled the country, unpaid, unarmed, and unafraid, speaking to colleges, churches, and community halls. No stage too small, no crowd too quiet. And everywhere he went, he brought not just his story, but a question. Why are we sending poor black boys to die in Vietnam when they can't even sit at a lunch counter in Alabama? He exposed the hypocrisy in plain view. The same nation that called him a coward was sending young men to die, men who, like Ali, had grown up with nothing, men who were denied dignity at home, only to be handed a gun and told to fight for freedom abroad. He called out the truth others were afraid to say. And slowly, something began to shift. The same college students who once watched him fight were now standing beside him. Protesters carried signs with his quotes. Black communities rallied behind his name. Even those who disagreed with his religion started to see his stance for what it was, pure courage. Ali had lost everything, his title, his money, his peak years, but he had kept the one thing that mattered, his soul. And while the system tried to reduce him to a number, tried to erase his legacy, Ali had already become something they couldn't touch. A symbol, but symbols don't pay the bills. Behind the poise and power of his speeches was a man quietly bleeding. His savings dwindled. His family felt the strain. His wife, Kalila, stood by him, but the pressure was immense. Offers came, lucrative ones, if he would just apologize, just sign a deal, just step away from the Nation of Islam, just admit he was wrong. Ali refused. Over and over, he refused, because to him, bending now would mean everything he said meant nothing. And so, he waited. He fought battles in courtrooms instead of rings. His legal team filed appeal after appeal, trying to overturn his conviction. Meanwhile, the war in Vietnam raged on, and the body count climbed. Public opinion began to shift, slowly, then all at once. The same people who had once cursed his name were now questioning the war itself. And through it all, Ali stood firm, his presence a living reminder of what it cost to speak the truth. But time kept ticking, and a man who once danced across the canvas was now nearing 30, the age when most boxers begin to fade. The hunger to return never left him. Each day without the ring was a kind of death. But Ali knew, if he had given in, if he had picked comfort over principle, he wouldn't be Ali. He'd be a man with money and no meaning. So he endured. And while the government tried to bury him, the streets kept whispering his name. In barber shops, on porches, in classrooms, in prisons, the legend of Ali only grew, not as a fighter, but as a man. Because in a nation full of noise, Muhammad Ali did the one thing no one expected. He stood silent and let the truth speak for him. By 1970, America was exhausted. The war dragged on. Protests filled the streets. Cities burned. Students died. And somewhere in the background, almost like a ghost, the name Muhammad Ali continued to echo. No longer the champion. Still not a prisoner. Caught in a limbo only the government could design. Ali's conviction still stood. The U.S. government had made its position clear. He refused the draft, and for that, he was guilty. 5 years in prison hung over his head like a shadow. But Ali wasn't giving in. His legal team kept pushing, slowly, strategically, winding their way toward the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court. It would be one of the most high-stakes fights of Ali's life. But this wasn't a match in Madison Square Garden. There were no gloves, no ropes, no cheering fans. Just a man's future and a government's pride. The case was known as Clay v. United States, and in it, Ali's lawyers argued something powerful, that the U.S. government had violated his constitutional rights by denying him conscientious objector status. He hadn't refused out of fear or rebellion. He refused out of faith. He wasn't trying to run. He was trying to stand. But standing, it turned out, was the hardest thing of all. For long years, Ali lived in the shadow of that sentence. Every time he stepped outside, he carried it on his shoulders. Every job offer denied. Every license request rejected. Every future plan on hold. All because he had chosen principle over obedience. But history has a way of shifting. And in the spring of 1971, something unexpected happened. 8 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, men who had nothing in common with Ali, men who had never stood where he stood, prayed how he prayed, or fought how he fought, made a decision. Unanimous. 8-0. Ali's conviction was overturned. Why? Because the government couldn't explain why it had denied him his request for conscientious objection. Because despite everything, the noise, the headlines, the hate, Ali had done exactly what the law allowed, stood by his faith. The news hit like an earthquake. Overnight, Muhammad Ali went from convicted criminal to vindicated citizen. The man America had punished was now proven right. And yet, there was no gloating, no revenge, no "I told you so." Ali simply stood before reporters and said, "I just thank Allah that the truth has finally come out." But what many didn't see, what the cameras didn't show, was the damage already done. He had missed more than 3.5 years of his prime. Gone. He had been 25 when they took his license. Now he was almost 30. In boxing, that's a lifetime. In life or it's a war. The government had lost the case. But Ali had already paid the price. He had lost millions in fight purses, lost the rhythm of the ring, lost years he could never get back. But he had kept something far more valuable. His dignity, his name, his soul. And slowly, the same America that had tried to destroy him began to change its tune. People who once booed now applauded. Young fighters called him a hero. Elderly strangers stopped him on the street and said, "You were right." But Ali didn't fight for applause. He never had. He fought for truth, even when it left him broke, alone, and branded a traitor. And now, finally, he was free. Free to speak, free to move, free to fight. And he would. Because Muhammad Ali wasn't done. Not yet. The lights were just as bright, the cameras, just as blinding. But something had changed when Muhammad Ali stepped back into the ring in 1970. After 3.5 years of forced silence, he was no longer just a boxer. He was a living question. Could a man lose everything and still be great? Could a fighter stripped of his prime still stand tall? Could a country that once hated him learn to love him again? Ali wasn't the same man who had danced past Sonny Liston. He was heavier, slower. The layoff had softened his reflexes, chipped away at his timing. But none of that mattered to the crowd. They weren't watching just to see punches. They came to see if the myth could still be real. And in his first comeback fight, against Jerry Quarry in Atlanta, Georgia, he answered with style. Ali moved, not like before, not like the lightning flash he once was, but with purpose. He still had that sharp tongue, that cocky smirk, that swagger. He won in 3 rounds. The king had returned. But boxing had changed while he was gone. A new generation had emerged, stronger, younger, meaner. And at the top stood a man named Joe Frazier, a thunderous force with a granite chin and a left hook that could knock down walls. Frazier was everything Ali had once been, undefeated, feared, a champion. And unlike the crowds, Frazier didn't care about legacies. He just wanted to win. So the stage was set. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden, Ali versus Frazier. The fight of the century. 2 undefeated men, 1 ring. The most anticipated boxing match in history. But it wasn't just about titles. It was about identity. Ali was the voice of protest, of rebellion, of defiance. Frazier was seen, fairly or unfairly, as the system's champion. The man who kept his head down, stayed out of politics, and did his job. The world watched. Fans chose sides. And when the bell rang, it was war. 15 rounds of violence, brilliance, punishment, and pride. Ali took hits he never would have absorbed in his prime. Frazier, unrelenting, kept coming. And in the 15th round, it happened. A left hook from Frazier, clean, perfect, brutal, sent Ali to the canvas. He got up, but the decision was clear. Frazier had won. For the first time in his career, Muhammad Ali had tasted professional defeat. The myth cracked. The crown was gone. And yet, Ali didn't retreat. He didn't crumble. Because in his eyes, defeat wasn't failure. It was fuel. He trained harder, fought more, and slowly, fight by fight, he reclaimed what was his. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. But it was real. Over the next few years, Ali battled a list of names carved into boxing history. Ken Norton, George Chuvalo, Joe Bugner, and Frazier again, this time with Ali earning the victory. But the world still doubted. Could he ever reclaim the ultimate title? Could the man they once tried to silence ever be champion again? That answer would come in 1974, in the most unlikely of places. Zaire, Africa, 1974. The air was thick with heat, music, and revolution. For Muhammad Ali, this wasn't just another title shot. It was a homecoming. Not to a place he'd ever lived, but to a continent whose blood ran through his veins. Africa welcomed him like a lost son. Crowds chanted his name with a rhythm that echoed from the streets to the sky. Ali, Bame, Ali, kill him. The words roared through the night. His opponent, George Foreman, younger, stronger, undefeated. A knockout artist who had destroyed every man in his path, including Joe Frazier. Foreman was no mere challenger. He was a wrecking ball in gloves. The world gave Ali no chance. He was too old, too slow, too worn. But Ali smiled. He had a plan. October 30th, 1974. The stadium in Kinshasa filled with nearly 60,000 people. The fight began at 4 a.m., timed to broadcast live to American televisions. And from the first bell, it was strange. Ali didn't dance. He didn't run. He leaned back into the ropes and took punishment. Foreman unleashed thunderous hooks, body shots that would crumble other men. And Ali, defiant, calculating, absorbed them. He whispered in George's ear, "Is that all you got, George?" He called it the rope-a-dope, a strategy so absurd it bordered on insanity. But round after round, something changed. Foreman's fists began to slow. His breath grew heavy. And Ali, battered but unbroken, waited. Then, in the 8th round, he struck. A lightning-fast right hook to the side of Foreman's head. Then a left. Then another right. Foreman stumbled. The giant collapsed. The stadium exploded. Ali had done the impossible. He didn't just win. He reclaimed the heavyweight title of the world. At 32, after years of exile, disgrace, and doubt, he had climbed back to the top of the mountain. And he did it on African soil, with the entire world watching. It wasn't just a win. It was a resurrection. But the victory wasn't just in the knockout. It was in the journey. Ali had been called a traitor, a coward, a has-been. He had been stripped of his title, his freedom, his prime. But what no one could strip away was his will. He had stared down a government and refused to bow. He had stared down time and refused to fade. And now, he had stared down a giant and refused to fall. In that moment, Muhammad Ali wasn't just a heavyweight champion of the world. He was the people's champion, a symbol of resilience, a voice for the unheard, proof that integrity could survive power, and that truth, even delayed, would rise. He stood in the center of the ring, hands raised high, drenched in sweat and glory. And the world, finally, remembered. He really was the greatest. Years passed. Fights came and went. Muhammad Ali would defend his title, lose it, win it again. His battles with Joe Frazier would become the stuff of legend, especially the brutal, soul-draining war in Manila, where both men nearly collapsed from exhaustion. But the story of Muhammad Ali was never just about the fights, because the world no longer watched him just to see who would fall. They watched to see how he stood. As his speed faded, as age crept in, Ali transformed once more, from champion to elder, from fighter to philosopher. He became the living symbol of everything he had stood for: courage, conviction, charisma, compassion. In time, even those who once condemned him changed their tune. Journalists who had called him unpatriotic now praised his bravery. Politicians who labeled him a criminal now shook his hand. Even the U.S. government, the very machine that tried to break him, would, decades later, call him a national treasure. But Ali didn't seek their praise. He had already been validated, not by medals or monuments, but by the eyes of the poor, the oppressed, the voiceless. By the little black boy in Alabama who now believed he could be somebody. By the war veteran who returned home wondering why he had fought and found comfort in Ali's defiance. By the protester, the preacher, the prisoner who saw in Ali a kind of truth that couldn't be knocked down. In the 1980s, Parkinson's disease began to steal his strength. His voice slowed. His hands trembled. But the fire, it never left his eyes. He lit the Olympic flame in 1996 with shaking arms and unshakable dignity. The entire world watching, silent, reverent, moved. It was the moment America looked in the mirror and saw not the rebel, not the troublemaker, not the draft dodger, but the man, the hero, the father, the teacher, the peacemaker. In his final years, Ali traveled the world as an ambassador of goodwill. He visited refugee camps, spoke to leaders, prayed in mosques and churches alike. His presence inspired peace because he had once stood alone in the storm and never lost himself. And when he passed in 2016, the world didn't just mourn a boxer. It mourned a voice, a force, a conscience, because Muhammad Ali had done what few ever could. He refused to betray his beliefs, refused to fight someone else's war, refused to stay silent. And because of that, millions of others found their voices. He showed us that greatness isn't defined by how loud you talk, how many titles you win, or how many people praise you. Greatness is standing your ground when the ground is shaking beneath you. It's losing everything and still keeping your soul intact. It's saying no, not out of arrogance, but out of honor. Muhammad Ali fought in rings, but his greatest battle was outside them. Against injustice, against fear, against the weight of a system determined to silence him. And in that fight, the one no referee could score, he won. Not by knockout, but by standing tall. Unmoved. Unbent. Unbreakable. He was, and always will be, the greatest. What would you have done in his place? Would you sacrifice everything for what you believe in? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to remember what real courage looks like.